Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Welcome to the, you need it louder? You're okay, good. Welcome to the Bilingual Mind, Brain, and Child Development Symposium here at the University of Texas. I'm James Booth. I'm going to start out with a few introductory remarks about the symposium, and then I'm going to use part of my time as an opportunity to tell you about a couple of the only two studies I've done that are related to bilingualism. So I hope those two studies will kind of illustrate some of the big questions that are in the field of bilingualism. So I'd like to acknowledge both our department, Communication Sciences and Disorders, for helping to organize this, but particularly the Harrington Fellows Program. Some of you may not know about this program. It's a very wonderful program that we have here at University of Texas. It brings scholars from really all over the world, around 5 scholars who are professors at other universities here for a year to focus on their research. Julia Coleman, who's organizing this conference, is a Harrington Fellow. I'll speak a little more about her later. This program also supports graduate students who come here and do a year of studies with professors. So it's a really wonderful program to have here to enrich the academic atmosphere at University of Texas. So these are our invited speakers. I thought I'd put up pictures here if you don't know what they look like, so that you could track them down during break times before they actually speak. So Ellen Bialystock from York University, Karen Emery from San Diego State University, and Claude Goldenberg. I haven't met him yet, from Stanford University. So please do seek them out during break time. So thank you, the three of you, for coming to be our keynote invited speakers for this conference. These distinguished speakers will be introduced by 3 folks here. So Yulia Coverman, who's organizing the symposium, Richard Meyer from linguistics, and Rebecca Callahan from curriculum and instruction. I'm meeting people too, which is good. So thank you for introducing our distinguished speakers. And then a really interesting feature of the symposium is going to be an opportunity for open discussion. So our presenters will certainly be involved, but 3 people from Communication Sciences and Disorders, Barash Chandrasekaran, Li Shang, and Lisa Bador will be involved in that. And we have a special guest today, recent addition, Gigi Luck from Harvard University. So thank you all for that. I want to take a moment to thank Yulia for coming here. She's been absolutely amazing for this year. Not only is she a first-rate scholar in the area of language and literacy, but she has, I think, enhanced many of our lives here at University of Texas. It's true. Thank you, Yulia. What I have here is a listing of talks that she's sponsored over the course of this year. So this is about 10 talks. So she's had people from all over Texas, but all over the U.S., and some international speakers come here and give talks and interact with people in my department, Communication Science and Disorders, but also in other departments like linguistics and education and psychology and engineering. We'll have FNIR's functional near-infrared spectroscopy workshop coming up as well. So thank you, Yulia. So as I said, I was going to take this opportunity just to tell you about a couple studies that I've done in the area of bilingualism. I think one of the big questions in bilingualism is whether there are overlapping or distinct brain networks for processing the two languages. So you can think about this as assimilation versus accommodation. So the idea of assimilation would be that second language learning recruits the brain network for native language processing versus accommodation, where second language recruits brain structures not involved in native language processing. So we set out to kind of investigate these hypotheses by looking at three groups. So CC, which is native Chinese speakers reading Chinese, EE, which is native English speakers reading English, and then CE, native Chinese speakers who are late learners of English reading English. So we looked at these groups. Those of you who know some of the work that we do, we often use a rhyming task to look at phonological processing. So folks see a couple words sequentially, and then they have to make a judgment as to whether these words are related or not. Some words can be rhyming, others non-rhyming. Turns out that we also have a conflicting manipulation, which I won't get into here. The general idea is that this taps into orthography, but also orthography to phonology mapping. So these are examples of the items in English. Of course, we designed a parallel version of this task in Chinese. So here are the four different conditions. It turns out in Chinese you're also able to do this conflicting versus non-conflicting manipulation because there's these things called phonetic radicals which allow you to do that. So we had rhyming tasks in both languages, and we looked for differences or similarities between groups. So these are the three groups here. We have our English reading English, Chinese reading Chinese, and Chinese reading English. And this is just within a language, so you can probably already notice some similarities and differences. So if you look at the Chinese English, they look quite a bit similar to the Chinese Chinese. Whereas the English kind of look different than these two groups at a macro level. Of course, the better thing to do is not to just look within groups, but is to look between groups, so statistically compare between groups, and these are all the pairwise comparisons that you could do. So on the top row here, you have Chinese compared to English. And I'm not going to get into the specifics here, but the idea is, well, there's some distinct activation associated with both groups. When you compare the English to the Chinese English, either greater for English or less for English. Again, you get some indication that there is kind of distinct networks involved in processing the two languages. What I thought was kind of most interesting was this comparison of Chinese to Chinese English. There aren't a lot of differences between the two groups, except for one area here in right middle occipital gyrus, which I'll get to in a bit. So the big story, I think, here is that there are a lot of similarities of Chinese reading English to the native Chinese network. We further went to look at brain behavior correlations between either standardized measures or performance on the experimental task. And this is a reflection of three of those brain behavior correlations. Word ID and word attack are standardized measures of reading. Accuracy is actually performance on the rhyming task, and this is amount of activation. And what you see here is that better performance on English is associated with greater activation in these three regions, IPL, precuneus, and MFG. Again, I'm not going to get into the specific regions. It is interesting to note that these are regions associated with the Chinese network. So greater proficiency in reading English is associated with greater engagement of the Chinese network. We can look at other correlations which are associated with decreasing activation as a function of skill. Here, again, we have, actually in this case, these are all standardized measures. Word identification, word attack, which are standardized reading measures. Again, we have activation. Here we have three different negative correlations in the ITG, IFG, and another cluster in the IFG. Again, I'm not going to focus on the individual regions here, just to note that these areas tend to be, or I should say, are areas that are associated with the English network. Okay, so less proficiency is associated with greater activation in the English network. So to conclude, I think we have evidence for assimilation here. The Chinese English seem to be similar to the Chinese, and then the two brain behavior correlations, I think, converge on assimilation, with higher skill being associated with greater activation in the Chinese network and less activation in the Chinese network. I'm not sure why exactly that happened, but I can try that. Okay. And there's a little bit of evidence against assimilation, and this was this area in the right occipital lobe, which I pointed out in one of those maps, which seemed to be associated with Chinese language processing in particular. And here the Chinese English showed less engagement of that region. The second study I'd like to present to you is a study that I did collaboratively with a group of folks in China, looking at the influence of sign language on the neural organization for reading. So two major hypotheses have been floated around in the literature. Is that perhaps sign language reading is more bilateral, so engagement of the right hemisphere in particular, and kind of a corollary of that may be that reading in sign language is associated with engagement of areas involved in sign language processing. We compared a group of congenitally deaf signers to hearing controls, and we did this using our rhyming task, which I've just described to you. And we paired that with a meaning task, which is similarly structured to the rhyming task, but in this case, instead of making a rhyming judgment, the individuals see two words and make a relatedness judgment. So for example, I could give you the words king and queen. Are those two words related? You would say yes. So it's a meaning judgment. Turns out that the effects were quite similar across these two tasks, so I won't make much of the difference between these two tasks. So this is the results that we get here, and if you look at these maps, you can see that they're quite similar. So the congenitally deaf are quite similar to the hearing controls, both for the rhyming and for the meaning. So bilateral activation, and in both cases, predominantly left, but certainly bilateral in all the usual suspects in terms of the reading network. If you're used to looking at these images, and you may have noticed that there appears to be greater right hemisphere activation in the congenitally deaf, both for the rhyming, so compare this map to this map, and for the meaning, compare this map to this map. So there's evidence for greater right hemisphere engagement. This is actually a direct comparison between the two groups. On the top here, just on the top is a direct comparison. So this is congenitally deaf, greater than hearing controls. These are kind of axial slices. This would be on the right. So The colors correspond to the different tasks. That's not important here. What's important is just a general statement that in the right hemisphere you get quite a bit more engagement for the congenitally deaf as compared to the hearing controls. In this study, we also had the deaf individuals do a sign language task. It wasn't ideal because we didn't have control over what they were doing. It was just a passive viewing of signs. But this is the kind of the network that was activated during this passive viewing of signs. This isn't a great view of the brain to see the similarity between the sign language network and the reading network. But if you do look carefully at these two maps, the congenitally deaf in the right hemisphere show greater activation in multiple nodes, and that overlaps with the sign language network that you see in the right hemisphere. So this suggests that, yes, you do have more bilateral engagement in sign language users reading English, and this tends to overlap with areas involved in processing sign language. So we'd like to follow up this work. So some folks here at University of Texas are coming together to try to look to see whether those who are higher skilled at reading engage differential networks depending on the communication mode. So we're wanting to look at deaf and hard of hearing children with predominantly sign language, deaf and hard of hearing children with predominantly oral language, deaf and hard of hearing children both. So these are the different communication modes, and look to see what networks higher skilled readers in these different groups are engaging. So are they engaging networks involved in sublexical sign processing? Are they engaging networks involved in speech or lip reading? Are they engaging networks involved in residual hearing? So we'd like to continue on this avenue of investigation. So that just gives you kind of, well, my only two studies that are relevant, well, directly relevant to bilingual. But I think it perhaps gives you a taste for some of the big questions in bilingual work. Of course, there are a lot more big questions that I haven't touched upon, but that'll be the job, I think, of the invited speakers and also the discussants to highlight some of those issues and points of departure. So I thank you all for being here, and looking forward to the day.